Okay, so this is the second to last video in this Form 5471 beginner series, and this video is going to cover IRS Schedule R, distributions from a foreign corporation. So first step always is to figure out who needs to file this, right? So if we go back to our required information table here within the instructions, at the very bottom here you can see we have separate Schedule R for Cat 4 and Cat 5A filers. Okay, so that applies to us. We're both Cat 4 and Cat 5A for purposes of this scenario. So we're going to have to do the filings. Now, Schedule R at a high level here is used to report all the types of dividend distributions that went out to the shareholders, right? So this applies anytime there's a cash dividend distribution or perhaps even a property distribution. So remember, a shareholder can receive a dividend distribution, but it might not be cash. It could be tangible or intangible property. At the same time, it's still a dividend distribution, and so it should be reported as such on Schedule R. So there's a couple of columns here to note. The first one is to describe the type of distribution. So there's really three pieces that they want to see on this. So taxable or non-taxable, and then what type of property was distributed. So in this case, it's just cash. Remember, if we look at our financial statements here, we have accumulated earnings and profits of $23,676, and during the year we distributed $5,000 to the shareholders. 75% went to John, our U.S. shareholder, and then the remaining 25% went to that Bermuda holding company. So what we want to do here is list out the different types of distributions and from what different types of categories of income they came out of. So again, we have taxable, non-taxable, cash is the type of property, and then we enter a description as the second line item here, what type of distribution it is. So the distribution to John, right? So the $3,750 sent to him, that is from PTEP, right? So that's from previously taxed earnings and profits. And so we already covered this on Schedule J and Schedule P, Schedule I-1. So we've already discussed, the issues around, okay, when you have Subpart F income allocated to a shareholder, that amount is included in their return, so they pay tax on it. And then any kind of cash distributions they actually received, that is not going to be taxable to them because they're already including the Subpart F piece as their total income inclusion. So the $3,750 in column C, they want to know the amount in the functional currency that was actually distributed. So column C, using the functional currency, is going to be what was actually paid out. And then it's in column D where we get a little more precise here about whether or not this was a distribution from the foreign corp's E&P or not. So what's an example where you might have varying amounts? Well, dividend distributions are generally coming out of earnings and profits, but if the company doesn't have enough E&P, but they still have the cash, you can have what's called a non-dividend distribution, or it's also referred to as a return of principal. So when you have a non-dividend distribution or a return of principal, that is not coming out of E&P. You're just giving the shareholder their money back. And so for that reason, that cash receipt is not going to be a taxable dividend. So for example, let's say the corporation has no E&P, but it still distributed out these amounts. You would have the amount of distribution is $3,750, but the amount of E&P distribution that's part of this would be zero, right? Because we have a non-dividend distribution. But in our case, we do have accumulated E&P, so that's why we have not only the amount of the distribution here, so $3,750 is going out to John, and then the $1,250 goes out to the other company, and then the amount of E&P that's attributed to these amounts is the same amount, so $3,750. Now, what's important about Schedule R is I've seen this prepared a number of ways where they only list the distributions to the person filing this form. I don't think that's entirely accurate. I think you should be listing all of the distributions that come out of the foreign corporations, come out of the foreign corporation during the year, and just use separate line items to make it very clear and traceable as to what amount goes to certain shareholders, what amount is PTEP, what amount is perhaps a non-dividend distribution or a cash dividend to non-U.S. shareholders, as I indicated here, right? So I have indicated that there was a $1,250 distribution, but it's a cash dividend payment to a non-U.S., so a non-U.S. person. Okay, now the form instructions also do ask that anything you report on here, the total amounts of what's reported in column D should reconcile with what you have in Schedule J, right, in column F. So remember, let me go to Schedule J really quickly here. Remember this schedule. This is the accumulated E&P roll forward of the CFC. So we have the E&P on the far left column here in column A, and then all those adjustments where we're reclassifying to Sub F income further on down the page. So the Schedule R instructions do ask that, okay, any totals amounts that are on Schedule R should reconcile with what the total is here on line 9 in column F, right? And so in order to do that, we have to report the $3,750, that's the 951A PTEP, but then also this $1,250 that was a distribution of E&P, but it went to a non-U.S. shareholder, okay? So that's why presentationally I have it done this way. So again, we're just making separate line items so it's very clear what's a cash distribution that's going to be subject to tax, what's not subject to tax, and what's not subject to tax because it's PTEP, okay? Okay, and now it also highlights that if you have amounts reported on Schedule R, you should make sure they reconcile with Schedule P as well, right? So in Schedule P, for the allocation of U.S. E&P and PTEP to the U.S. shareholders, we do have that $3,750 amount that's reported on there, right? So you recall when we went through that video, we had the $3,750 reported. Okay, so that covers it for the Schedule R. Again, this is second to last video. This is the last schedule that you need to complete as part of preparing the Form 5471. So now we just have one final video that we're going to discuss where we cover the income inclusions that we see for Subpart F income purposes or GILTI income purposes. After we've done the whole 5471, now where is that actually going to be reported on the income tax return for our shareholder here, John Q. Taxpayer, right? So after everything's done, now where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, where is the income reported and how is it going to be subject to tax? Okay, so that covers it for this video. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, leave me comments below, and I will see you on the very last video coming up here where we actually report the income on the return.